Hi student, welcome in our today's session. Today we start our third chapter in our paper first, that is complex number. This is new concept for you. In earlier LS standard, we studied the numbers, that is real number, natural number, odd numbers, even number. Now we are going to discuss about the new number, that is complex number. First of all, why here we use complex number? Why we introduce the new concept, that is complex number? We find the equations, that is quadratic equation, and we find its solution in our set of real numbers. Now here I am considering equation that is x square plus 1 is equal to 0, which is a quadratic equation, and if I have to find its solution, then we write x square is equal to minus 1, and if we take its square root, then we will get x is equal to root minus 1. But this equation has no solution in the set of real numbers. मग set of real number मध्ये असा कोणता नंबर आहे की ज्याचा स्क्वेअर निगेटिव्ह येतो? There is no any number whose square is negative. So this equation has no solution in the set of real number. This equation has no solution in set of real numbers. म्हणजे अशी इक्वेशन्स आहेत की ज्यांना आपल्याला रिअल नंबरच्या सेटमध्ये सोल्युशन मिळतच नाही. अशा वेळी काय करायचं, आपल्याला कॉम्प्लेक्स नंबर डिफाइन करायचा आहे. दॅट इज एक्स इज इक्वल टू विल गेट दी रूट मायनस 1, बट हियर in the set of real number there is no any value whose square root is negative. Since here we introduce a complex number, so the complex number is defined by, that is the I is equal to root minus 1. Here we introduce the symbol I, which is equal to root minus 1. Hence I square is equal to minus 1, which is very important for our chapter complex number. What is value of I? That is root minus 1. For a root minus 1, we take the value of I. Here we introduce the new symbol I. Since I square is equal to, we will get minus 1. This I is called as an imaginary number. This I is called as imaginary number. Imaginary number. A number which is in the form of ki. K means any real number. A number which is in the form of ki is called as an imaginary number. A number which is in the form of ki, where k belongs to r. म्हणजे k असणार आहे आपला रिअल नंबर असणार आहे. आपण इमॅजिनरी नंबर हा कुणाच्या फॉर्म मध्ये असेल, काय मध्ये आईला जोडून कोणताही रिअल नंबर असू शकतो. अ नंबर इन द फॉर्म ऑफ ki is called as imaginary number. Is called as a imaginary number. Now we define the concept, that is complex number. And here remember that what is r? That is r is equal to root minus 1, and value of I square is minus 1. Always remember these two things. Value of I is root minus 1, and from this I square is minus 1. Now we define our complex number. What is mean by complex number? A number which is in the form of a plus ib. A number which is in the form of a plus ib is called as complex number. Is called as complex number, where a b belongs to r. इथे जे घेतले ना आपण a आणि b, हे कोण असतील तुमचे रियल नंबर्स असणार आहेत. The number which is in the form of a plus ib, where a is called real part of, where, and the complex number is denoted by z. Notation of complex number is z. Complex number is denoted by small z. Is denoted by z. Complex number चं notation लक्षात ठेवा, which is denoted by z. Hence z is equal to a plus ib, where A is called real part of Z, where A is called real part of Z. म्हणजे जर तुमचा A plus B IB हा कॉम्प्लेक्स नंबर असेल तर त्यामध्ये हा A जो असतो ह्याला काय म्हणायचं, कॉम्प्लेक्स नंबरचा रियल पार्ट. अँड B is called an imaginary part of Z. In complex number A plus IB, A is its real part and B is its imaginary part. का? कारण तो कुणाला जोडून आलेला आहे, which is a coefficient of I, and I is called as imaginary number and B is a coefficient of imaginary number. Since the B is called as imaginary part of Z and A is called as a real part of Z. Z means what? Which is a notation of our complex number. Don't forget this. A number in the form of A plus IB. असा नंबर की जो A plus IB मध्ये लिहिला असेल पण जे AB येथे रियल असतील. That is in the form of, for example, 3 plus 4i minus 1 plus 5i 7 plus root 2i root 3 plus 2i. These numbers, these all numbers are called as a complex number. So in 3 plus 4i, A is real part and the 4 is imaginary part. Here minus 1 is real and plus 5 is imaginary. So make the table for this. Complex number, real part and its imaginary part. That is 3 plus 4i. Then the real part of this complex number is 3. Imaginary part of this number is 3. Imaginary part लिहिताना I जोडून लिहायचं नाही, फक्त त्याचा coefficient लिहायचा. The 4i is not imaginary part, only its coefficient is its imaginary part. Next 2 minus 3i. Then its real part is 2. Imaginary part is minus 3. 3 plus root 2. Then 3 is real and the root 2 is imaginary. Minus 1 minus I. Then real part is minus 1 and imaginary part is also minus 1. इथे काहीच नाहीये म्हणजे किती कोएफिशियंट असणार आहे, 1 असेल. नेक्स्ट वन 2 plus 5y. Then real part is 2 and its imaginary part is 5. इमॅजिनरी पार्ट लिहिताना काही जण चुकून काय करतात, तिथे आय पण लिहिला जातो पण इमॅजिनरी पार्ट मध्ये फक्त काय लिहायचं आपल्याला, इमॅजिनरी नंबरचा कोएफिशियंट म्हणजे कोण असतो, इमॅजिनरी पार्ट असतो. सो इथपर्यंत समजलं सगळ्यांना. इमॅजिनरी, फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल वाय वी इंट्रोड्यूस दी कॉम्प्लेक्स नंबर, कारण ज्या काही इक्वेशन्सना आपल्याला रिअल नंबरच्या सेटमध्ये सोल्युशन मिळत नाही, सो आपण नवीन नंबर डिफाईन केला, दॅट इज कॉल्ड ॲज अ imaginary number and which is always in the form of ki, where I is what, root minus 1, since we will get the value of I square which is minus 1. Now we define the complex number which is in the form of A plus IB, where AB belongs to R and its notation is small z. In A plus IB, the A is called as real part and the B is called as its imaginary part. Now here we see the some complex number whose real part and we introduce its imaginary part. Now see the two more concepts, pure real and pure imaginary. A complex number A plus IB complex number Z is equal to A plus IB. If any complex number, a complex number whose imaginary part is 0, a complex number whose imaginary part is 0. Now see here, this is our complex number and its imaginary part is what? That is B. If it is 0, that is B is equal to 0, then Z is equal to, will get A plus I into 0, then it is 0, then Z is equal to only A. जर तुमच्या कॉम्प्लेक्स नंबरचा इमॅजिनरी पार्ट 0 असेल तर आपल्याला काय मिळणार आहे, Z इज इक्वल टू ओनली A. A मीन्स व्हॉट, रिअल पार्ट. A complex number whose imaginary part is 0 is called as purely real. Is called as purely real complex number. म्हणजे ज्या कॉम्प्लेक्स नंबरचा इमॅजिनरी पार्ट 0 असेल त्या कॉम्प्लेक्सला काय म्हणायचं, प्युअरली रियल कॉम्प्लेक्स नंबर. दॅट इज z इज इक्वल टू a. सेकंड, a complex number whose real part is 0. That means who is 0? A. Whose real part is 0. That is a is 0. Then z is equal to 0 plus ib. That is z is equal to only ib. Z is only ib. If its real part is 0, then we will get this z is equal to ib. Then is called as purely imaginary. Is called as purely imaginary complex number. जर रियल पार्ट 0 असेल तर त्या कॉम्प्लेक्स नंबरला काय म्हणायचं, प्युअरली इमॅजिनरी कॉम्प्लेक्स नंबर. अँड अ कॉम्प्लेक्स नंबर हुज इमॅजिनरी पार्ट इज 0, दिस कॉम्प्लेक्स नंबर इज कॉल्ड एज ए प्युअरली रियल कॉम्प्लेक्स नंबर. नाउ सी दी नेक्स्ट, दॅट इज झिरो कॉम्प्लेक्स नंबर. Zero complex number. A complex number whose both real and imaginary parts are 0. म्हणजे असा कॉम्प्लेक्स नंबर की ज्याचा रिअल आणि इमॅजिनरी दोन्ही पार्ट जर 0 असतील तर त्या कॉम्प्लेक्सला काय म्हणायचं, झिरो कॉम्प्लेक्स नंबर. दॅट इज z इज इक्वल टू 0 प्लस 0 i. is called as a zero complex number. A complex number whose real and imaginary part are 0 is called as a zero complex number and it is denoted by 0. That is z is equal to 0 only. 0 means what? 0 plus 0 i, which is called as a zero complex number. This is all about the complex number. Now we see our next point in complex number, that is conjugate of a complex number. Conjugate of a complex number. Conjugate of a complex number. If z is equal to a plus ib, let z is equal to a plus ib be a complex number, then complex conjugate is defined as a minus ib. If z is equal to a plus ib be a complex number, then complex conjugate is defined as a minus ib and it is denoted by z bar. Complex conjugate is denoted by z bar and complex number is denoted by z. If a plus ib is complex number, then its conjugate is what? A minus ib and its notation is z bar. Then what is its complex conjugate? Complex conjugate of a plus ib is a minus ib. If its z is complex number, then z bar is its complex conjugate. Complex conjugate कसं काढायचं, आपल्याला काय करायचं, फक्त इमॅजिनरी नंबरचं साइन बदलायचं, रियल नंबरचं साइन चेंज करायचं नाही. सपोज फॉर एक्झाम्पल z is equal to 2 plus 3i, then z bar is equal to 2 minus 3i. Z is equal to minus 1 plus I. Then conjugate is minus 1 minus I. Don't change the sign of real number, real part. If we have to find the complex conjugate, then change the sign of only imaginary part. Z is equal to minus 1 minus I. Then Z bar is equal to minus 1 plus I. If z is equal to 2, then z bar is equal to also 2. The z is equal to 2. That means this complex number is purely real. Hence its conjugate is also purely real. Z is equal to 5i. Then z bar is equal to minus 5i. This is a complex conjugate. What is mean by complex conjugate? Change the sign of only imaginary number. Then we will get the complex conjugate of our given complex number. So in this lecture we studied about complex number. First we see what is imaginary number. An imaginary number which is in the form of ki. Next we define the complex number. A number in the form of a plus ib is called as a complex number where ab belongs to r, and the complex number notation of complex number is small z, where a is called real part and b is called its imaginary part. Next we see the purely real complex number. A complex number whose imaginary part is 0 is called as purely real. A complex number whose real part is 0 is called as purely imaginary complex number. A complex number whose both real and imaginary parts are 0 is called as a zero complex number. Next we define a new concept, that is complex conjugate. What is mean by complex conjugate? Let z is equal to a plus ib be a complex number, then a minus ib is a complex conjugate of the complex number z, and the conjugate is denoted by z bar. Complex conjugate is denoted by z bar. This is notation for complex conjugate z bar. And here we see some examples and their complex conjugate. So you should write 5 examples of complex number and write their complex conjugates. Now the next point, there are some properties of complex conjugate. Now see, this is complex number and this is the conjugate. If I am taking conjugate of this z bar again, then z bar of bar याचा conjugate घेतला आणि आपण पुन्हा जर त्याचा conjugate घेतला z bar of bar, conjugate of conjugate 2 minus 3i is equal to 2 plus 3i. What is this? This is a z. That means first property of complex conjugate is if we take conjugate of 2 times of a complex number, then we will get the conjugate, we will get the complex number itself. म्हणजे एखाद्या complex numberचा जर तुम्ही 2 वेळा conjugate घेतला तर आपल्याला कोण मिळतो? स्वतः complex number मिळतो. This is the first property of our complex number. Now see here, when z and z bar are same, म्हणजे complex number and complex conjugate, when they are same, if our complex number is purely real, then complex number and its conjugate are equal. First property, properties of conjugate, that is z bar. First property, here we see if we take 2 times of conjugate, then we will get the complex number. Next, second, z is equal to z bar, where z is purely real. Z means complex number when z is purely real. Here we see this. म्हणजे कॉम्प्लेक्स नंबर आणि त्याचा कॉन्जुगेट हे कधी सेम असतील जर तुमचा दिलेला कॉम्प्लेक्स नंबर हा प्युअरली रिअल असेल तर. दिस इज दी प्रॉपर्टीज ऑफ कॉम्प्लेक्स नंबर. अँड सी हियर, z is equal to minus z bar. Z is equal to minus z bar if z is purely imaginary. Z is equal to minus z bar म्हणजे दोघं ऑपोजिट कधी असतील? Z is equal to minus z bar. See here, z and minus z bar. If our complex number is purely imaginary, म्हणजे जर तो नंबर तुमचा प्युअरली इमॅजिनरी असेल तर आपल्याला कॉम्प्लेक्स नंबर आणि त्याचा कॉन्जुगेट कसे मिळतात तर z is equal to minus times z bar and both are same when our z, that means complex number, is purely real. This is the properties of complex conjugate. In next lecture, we see our next point, that is algebra of a complex number. So you should write down the 5 examples of complex number and their conjugates also, and write the first. You write, take any complex number, that is serial number 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Write here complex number, then write its real part, write its imaginary part, and second column for its complex conjugate. Make this table. You can take any 5 complex number here and write its real part, imaginary part, and write it also its complex conjugate, and complete this table. Next lecture we see the algebra of our complex number.